Welcome to the WinField United Innovation Center. My name is Greg Dahl. I'm a Senior Research Manager for Product Development, and I've got a nice little demonstration I'd like to show you today. We have a K-salt glyphosate applied at a reduced rate. We're going to be looking at the influence of water quality and adjuvant choice. And so we have here different water qualities and different adjuvants. It was 69 degrees when they sprayed this field. We have different water qualities out here. One of our treatments is distilled water, so there's no impurities in it. And then we have water that is 125 parts per million in water hardness, 250 parts per million in water hardness, 500 parts per million in water hardness, or 1,000 parts per million in water hardness. Some of our treatments have no adjuvant added, so it's just the glyphosate alone. Some of our treatments have AMS added at 8.5 pounds per 100 gallons of water, and some of our treatments have Class Act NG added at 2.5% volume per volume. Water hardness can be real antagonistic to glyphosate. It can affect the control, especially on weeds like velvet leaf or kochia. And they respond very well by adding an adjuvant that contains AMS, like in the AMS or in the Class Act NG. And then lamb's quarter responds very, very well to the surfactant that's in the Class Act NG. And you can see that we're getting very good control even with very, very poor water. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate with no adjuvant. The water was distilled water. We do not have complete control of the lamb's quarter because lamb's quarter is hard to wet. We need a surfactant to get better coverage and better deposition on the lamb's quarter. Also, velvet leaf contains calcium in the leaf surface, and we did not get complete control of the velvet leaf even though the water was distilled water. Today is September 25th. This field was sprayed on September 1st, so it's 25 days since we sprayed, and we're going to look at the results of our spraying. The plots had velvet leaf in here, lamb's quarter, some crabgrass, some foxtail, and the plants were about 15 inches to maybe 20 inches tall when they were sprayed. This treatment is glyphosate with distilled water with no additional adjuvant, and you can see in this plot we got very good control with very good water. So this plot is the glyphosate alone. The water quality is 125 parts per million in water hardness. We got very good control of the lamb's quarter, the grasses. We got pretty good control of the velvet leaf. There is a velvet leaf plant that was not completely controlled in this plot. This plot is glyphosate alone. The water quality is 250 parts per million in water hardness, and in this case we did get quite good control of all of the weeds in the plot. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate alone. The water quality was 500 parts per million in water hardness, and it did leave some lamb's quarters not completely controlled, and it left a lot of velvet leaf not completely controlled. This plot was treated with glyphosate alone. The water quality is 1,000 parts per million in water hardness. The lamb's quarter were not completely controlled, and there's a lot of velvet leaf that were not completely controlled in this plot. This plot was treated with glyphosate and AMS. It was put out with distilled water, and we got complete control of most of our weeds. I see one lamb's quarter plant here that didn't get completely controlled, but everything else is completely controlled. This plot was treated with glyphosate and AMS. It had water quality of 125 parts per million and water hardness. I do see a few lamb's quarter plants not completely controlled, but all of the velvet leaf plants are completely controlled. This plot was treated with glyphosate at AMS. The water was at 250 parts per million in water hardness, and I don't see any weeds that were not completely controlled in this plot. This plot was treated with glyphosate at AMS. The water was 500 parts per million in water hardness, and I do see a few lamb's quarter plants that were not controlled. I do not see any velvet leaf plants that weren't controlled. This plot was treated with glyphosate and AMS. The water was 1,000 part per million in water hardness. I do see some lamb's quarters that weren't completely controlled, and I see one velvet leaf plant that wasn't completely controlled. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate and Class Act NG at 2.5%. The water was distilled water. We have complete control of all the weeds in this plot. All of the lamb's quarter, all of the velvet leaf are completely controlled. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate and Class Act NG at 2.5% volume per volume. The water was 125 parts per million in water hardness. All of the weeds are completely controlled. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate and Class Act NG at 2.5% volume per volume. The water was 250 parts per million in water hardness. I see one lamb's quarter plant that wasn't completely controlled. I see all of the velvet leaf plants are completely controlled. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate and Class Act NG at 2.5% volume per volume. The water was 500 parts per million in water hardness, and all of the weeds, all of the lamb's quarter, all of the velvet leaf are completely controlled. This plot was sprayed with glyphosate and Class Act NG at 2.5% volume per volume. This water was 1,000 parts per million in water hardness, and we've got complete control of all the broadleaf and grass weeds. There's no lamb's quarter that are not controlled. There's no velvet leaf that are not controlled. In this demonstration, we saw that water hardness can have an effect in reduced weed control, that adding an adjuvant can overcome that antagonism, and we're very proud of the ability of Class Act NG to perform in a lot of very hard water situations. Weeds like lamb's quarter respond to the surfactant that's in the Class Act NG. Velvet leaf, kochia, things like that respond very much to the AMS that's in those adjuvant systems. So we're very proud of the activity of Class Act NG. It's the standard for use with glyphosate applications in the United States.